You may have to do that. I'll try to see if I can find some other. Oh, good. Okay, so today is going to be pretty straightforward, especially for those of you that are in the financial modeling class, because pretty much what we're going to be doing today is kind of what you have already seen to a certain extent, with maybe a few minor variations in that course. But today, what we're going to do is kind of spend our time working through 3 different models I sent you via email this morning, and also copied them off there for you to take a look at. Now, the first model that we're going to be taking a look at actually is going to be the acquisition, development, construction loan. So let me flip to that one here. All right. So, this model, for those of you that haven't seen it before, in essence is taking a look at a project kind of from the time of acquisition of the raw land, and then making the assumption that you are going to have purchased that land, and then subsequent to that you're going to do the construction over the next whatever 12 months or so. And with construction loans, one of the things that you need to keep in mind that's different from all the other types of loans that we've talked about in the real estate finance class is that construction loans are basically like lines of credit, okay? And so you only pay interest on the amount that you have basically drawn down or borrowed at any particular given time. All right, so what that means is that as you go through the construction process, in essence, you draw down on that line of credit, and in essence, over time, you accumulate a balance that gets larger and larger over time, and then you pay interest on that amount that you have drawn down. Now, the way in which this model works is fairly straightforward. Once again, we've got our interest rate up here of 12%, which basically is the equivalent, in this particular case, of 1% per month, okay? 12% interest rate divided by 12 would be, in essence, 1% per month. And so, whenever you're applying the interest, you're applying the interest upon basically what you have borrowed from the previous month, and then from that point sort of forward, the cumulative balance. Now, one of the things to sort of point out here is, as I just kind of said, is unlike other loans where you get the lump sum dollar amount at the beginning of the term, here your balance increases over time depending on how much you are drawing down based upon what you actually need for the construction process. So for this particular loan, the way that I've got it set up is the dispersals take place at the end of each month. Okay, now here time period 0, the end of month 0 would be the same as what? The beginning of month 1. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, but in terms of when these dispersals, the project costs are being incurred, they're being incurred at the end of the month, all right, for each of these months. So in this particular case, the first set of project costs are incurred 30 days into the project, if you will, or basically 1 month into the project. You've got project cost of $100,000, okay? And then over the course of that month, what you're gonna see is that you're not gonna have any actual interest accumulation during that first month because this payment is occurring at the end of the month. So the interest is not going to be accumulated on that first month until the second month. Does that make sense? Okay? So in other words, this is happening, if you will, at the end of 30 days, but that the interest is not going to be calculated until the end of the next 30 days, which will be this $1,000. So in other words,
interest is paid every.
right. So in essence, what you've got, if you take a look at the formulas, for example, for this particular amount of the construction interest, and you look at what it's doing, it's basically taking what is your loan balance there at the end of that previous month and simply multiplying it by the interest rate of 12% divided by 12, or $1,000 on obviously $100,000 dollar. Okay, does that make sense, everybody? I know most, just out of curiosity, just refresh me, I know most of you are in the modeling class. How many of you are not in the modeling class? Okay, so a few of you, all right. So, at this point, all we're doing is just simply taking a look at what is the interest being calculated per month as we sort of go down from month to month, what is going to be the interest calculated on that previous month's ending balance. And so what you're seeing, just to sort of point things out, so here at the, basically the end of month 2, you've got, in essence, that we borrowed $200,000, but you're only paying interest on the first $100,000, so therefore the balance that you owe at the end of that month is $201,000. Does that make sense? Yes? Okay? Now, for each subsequent month, if we just kind of look down maybe a month or two later, same sort of thing is happening. We're taking that ending balance from the previous month and then just simply multiplying that balance times the interest rate divided by 12. Okay, is everybody comfortable with that? All right, so it just increases each and every month.
Your model is based on the 3360, just a straight 30.
For the purpose of this, yes. Okay, all right. Other questions? Okay, so now what's going to happen, now one of the things that can take place, and I've included a column for this, is if you think about the construction process, the construction loan can be set up a variety of ways. This is, you know, a fairly simple, standard way that, in essence, you're borrowing all the money and you're not making any payments to the lender on the loan until the end of the construction process, at the end of that year, okay? Because, I mean, think about it. Your property's not generating any cash flows, so what income do you have to really, you know, pay on this loan? Now, some lenders may require some sort of either principal or interest payments to be made during the course of the loan, but many of them, especially if, once again, you've got, you know, a decent sort of credit history and you've got a takeout commitment for a permanent lender at the end of this, you know, it's not going to be uncommon to go ahead and accumulate that full balance. And we come back to actually that principal reduction payment here. So if we actually go down to the sort of the very bottom of this, what you're going to find is that the total amount of your construction cost, and these are just simply the draws each month, so these just simply represent the dollar amount that we're having to pay our contractors for supplies and for labor, that sort of thing. But the total amount of the actual construction was $2,360,000. But then the amount of accumulated interest over that 12-month period, based upon those drawdowns, was $147,915. Okay, does that make sense? And then those two added together give us a complete overall dollar amount that we owe the lender at the end of all of this is of basically 2.5 million. Okay, does that make sense? Now, that having been said, one of the things that can take place potentially with this is if the lender were to say, for whatever reasons, maybe you've had cost overruns, maybe the market has changed in some way, the project has become more risky, whatever, they may say, we want an additional capital infusion into this at some point. And so under those conditions, you can in essence go over here for any one of those months and say, okay, well this month we're potentially going to infuse $500,000 of additional capital. Now obviously that's going to have the effect of reducing the overall amount that you're going to owe the lender at the end of the loan, okay? Because obviously you paid down part of that balance, okay? Does that make sense?
Can you show me? I mean, where did you make the payment?
Okay, all right. Now, another thing to sort of point out here, and this is just sort of, it's logical and it's practical, but it also is, I don't know the exact words to sort of express this, but in essence, if you're a developer and this is the way your loan is structured, you have an incentive to do what? To push all of your actual cost or all of your expenditures to as late as possible. In other words, pay your contractors as slow as possible. I mean, I'm not saying that's good business practice from the standpoint of dealing with your contractors, but from the developer's point of view, if you can shift, let's just take this 1 month as an example. All of month 7's expenditures, just by 1 month forward, that's going to have an effect on the amount of interest that you're going to have to pay, because in essence, you're paying 1 month less interest on that amount. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm not saying it's going to make a huge difference, but let's just take this as an example. So our total interest right now is $147,915.79. And so just by basically moving this $600,000 in month 7 to month 8, meaning month 8 is now going to be $800,000. Okay. So $141,672.17. So a difference, just to kind of gain perspective here. 147,915.79 minus 141,672.17. So $6,243.62 just by moving basically that expenditure forward by 1 month. Does that make sense, everybody? So this gets at a really sensitive issue between developers and contractors, okay? That, once again, from the developer's point of view, you would want to obviously delay payment to your contractors as long as you possibly could, because you don't want to incur that extra interest cost, okay? But yet your contractors are going to be saying, hey, we want to be paid now for the work that we did, last month or 2 months ago or whatever it might be, because, obviously we've got to pay our laborers, and we don't necessarily want to have to take out a short-term loan on our own to have to pay our workers. So what do you guys think about that? I mean, any sort of thoughts? Anybody ever have any experience with that kind of a situation before?
It's called cash flow management.
It is short-term cash flow management. But I mean, have anybody ever encountered that kind of situation before, where you're the contractor and then you're having to wait on payment from the developer for an extended period of time? No?
The other way around, slow in paying our people, but it's tricky because if you're not getting a larger company, you get a mom and pops, you're going to bankrupt them really fast, and then you're going to have to start all over. So if you get a larger company, they're more forgiving, more lenient, with pushing out a 30-day to a 45, 60-day.
Yeah, and I would argue that a lot of developers, will get a reputation really quick that they're either going to pay, be very quick to make those payments, or they're going to be the ones, just dragging it out potentially for months on end to actually, make those payments. But I guess all I was really trying to, say is, here's a motivation, from the perspective of the developer. Why is it that, they would want to slow pay if they've got access to the money? Why are they dragging it out? Well, if you can save yourself, $6,000, that's not an insignificant amount of money, on this size of a project.
Some unsophisticated contractors may not even realize that this is happening with them from a savings to the developer point of view. They may not even realize that this kind of stuff is happening to them. And I was going to say something down to blank.
I would argue you're absolutely right. In many cases, the story that the contractor may be told by the developer is, hey, I'm waiting on my money from the lender, and it's being held up because of this, that, or the other thing. And in some cases, that is true. Because in some cases, in order for the lender to actually release those funds, they've got to have, evidence that that work has been completed by that contractor. And so they're gonna usually do, a physical site inspection, or, whether it's, sending someone out there physically, or taking pictures, or having cameras mounted on site, or whatever it might be. But there's gonna be usually some sort of verification of the actual work took place. Paul?
Yeah, no, I'm not, like you said, you're not condoning it, obviously, but on the flip side, as a developer, you want to develop a good relationship with your contractors and have a good reputation, so couldn't that potentially ruin some relationships?
Sure.
Yeah.
I have a tickle in my brain. Out of curiosity, on the end of 7th month, can you put in that difference in payment as a principal reduction, just to see what it does to the overall interest?
You're saying take what? Take the 600,000?
The 6243, and do it as a principal reduction at the end of month 7, instead of pushing out the payment if you paid that difference. I'm just
You're saying
6243, 62.
Okay.
I just want to see what it does to the. See, it's not so like even if you calculated your savings, so we'll do a principal reduction instead. You can maintain the reputation that is like a $400 impact, so it's not even worth it.
Good. All right. Other thoughts, questions, observations on this? You got the property.
Are there any instances in this table where the construction interest and the interest are going to be different?
From the construction interest.
Some of the numbers itself are going to be different. Because I'm just trying to distinguish the difference between construction interest and normal interest, especially since their numbers are like the exact same.
No. In this, well, let me see if whether or not. No, in the way this model is set up, no.
Okay. So it's just basically the same thing.
Yep.
Okay.
It's I purposely set it up this way just simply because this is the way that your book had set up.
Okay.
What's the formula in column E?
Column E, the original formula in column E. That's just a dollar amount.
Well,
Oh, you mean column? Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, see, it's just taking what's in
Yeah.
column C.
Oh, okay.
With respect to retainage, if the bank holds the retainage, we essentially are not paying interest on that, right?
Bank doesn't hold retainage.
Yes, they
You
do.
just don't, no.
Yes, they do.
No, as if I get my AIA, the retainage is automatically withheld, so it's not part of my draw. It's gonna be the last draw the retainage is paid out of.
Okay.
So every time you get an AIA form, there's a line on there, that's 10% for retainage and it's held. It's the last payment, meaning once everything's done and everything's signed off, then you submit as your final draw is gonna be whatever remaining balance plus that 10% retainage. So basically that last draw 12, that's gonna be retainage.
But I thought some banks do the control of the retainage. They monitor the releases, and they monitor the contractors.
Yes.
And they hold the retainage.
No, they do, but the retainage is held in the AIA form, meaning the money's just not paid out. You're not paying interest on it.
That's what I'm saying. That was the question. We're not paying interest on it.
Well, because you haven't drawn on it, that's why you're not paying on it.
What's the AIA?
American Institute of Architects.
What's retainage?
Basically, it's just a sort of contingency from the lender's perspective of setting aside a dollar amount or a percentage toward the beginning of the project for sort of uncertainties.
Miscellaneous
Sort of
costs.
miscellaneous cost or
Make sure
expenses
that
to ensure that everything is,
Contractor finishes the job.
yeah.
And that's done at the very beginning?
Yeah. And, yeah, I'm gonna leave it with that. So, but yeah, that's all you're doing. Basically there, that yes, the lenders is simply saying that they want to exert a little bit of additional control, and as Angelo was saying, that in essence, you could have a situation of where the lender is extremely rigid on when they make those disbursements for the draws, and so they're gonna, every lender is a little bit different as to how much documentation is gonna be required in order to get the draws. In some cases, some of the lenders, if you've been working with them, time and time again, you simply submit the invoice to them, and then, it's an instant release. In other cases, it's gonna be a situation of, like I said, they're gonna come out, probably do an inspection, or, ensure that that portion of the work has been done. But at the end, one of the things that they're usually gonna be searching for is the project is not only physically completed, but also all final inspections have been done, and you've been given a certificate of occupancy by the local government.
So before the loan's approved, you basically work out with the bank in some instances, like which months and how much you're gonna get per month?
You could, in one sense, once again, if you've got a project that maybe you have sort of done over and over again, that is almost like the same kind of project, and you can probably schedule out pretty precisely as to what the draws are going to be from month to month.
Mm-hmm.
But in many cases, that's not necessarily going to be known precisely up front, because there obviously can be work stoppages for one reason or another, whether it's weather or lack of labor or building materials not being delivered to the site on time, or whatever it might be, that or not getting your permits, something that can delay the process.
So basically, it's like an open line of credit before they give you that
that's all it
next
is.
draw. Before they give you that next draw, they first have to
Ensure that the previous month's work or whatever's been done.
got it. And
However they choose to monitor that.
Sometimes they'll ask for, when you submit a draw, I've seen this, whenever you do a draw, when you submit your next draw, they'll ask for canceled checks for everything that was included in the last draw before they give you your next one, to make sure that you are spending the money.
And it's a lot easier. We talked a little bit about this. We talked a little bit about this earlier. Lenders now have the technology to monitor things a lot more closely than they did, even 10, 15, 20 years ago. And so they're able to see pretty much in real time, what you have spent, what you haven't spent, because your construction account is going to be with them, so they're going to see that the payments have been made to whoever they've been made to. Okay.
One more question. I heard that there's some developers that use the revolving line of credit, the construction loan, sort of like back burner kind of thing. And then as they begin to sell, they put the property in the market. They haven't even built it yet, but they put the property in the market. The buyer or
What's that, a deposit?
puts a deposit, which
It could be pretty substantial.
yeah, exactly. That's the money that he begins to use for the actual construction. That he only draws on that construction loan
When he has to.
if he has to.
No, and that's a smart strategy. And matter of fact, one of the probably fundamental changes that happened, post 2007, 2008, especially in Miami, with like the condo market, is that most of the developers started requiring substantially larger down payments on behalf of the people buying those condos. And I'm sure you guys probably even have better information about what those amounts were, but I've heard that many of them, it could have been upwards of 40% down payments, and or 50% down payments. So right there, you could get the lion's share of the work done on the project without ever having to dip into your reserves for the actual construction. And the lenders were certainly happy about that from the standpoint that is less risk that they're undertaking as well. Okay. All right, thoughts, comments? Okay. Any questions on this one? Good? Okay. So, basically, any sort of little questions on this, on your quiz, would be just you pretty much modifying this model, okay, in terms of interest rate, project cost, and then asking you, basic questions about, in essence, the dollar amount owed, that sort of thing. Okay. Now, down here at the bottom of this model, a couple of other little things that I've included to just kind of get a sense for, you know, what's really sort of happening here. All right, so you've got your total construction cost that, or construction loan cost, that are basically the 2507,915, and so to kind of get some sort of just a sense of reality of what that means on a per square foot basis for your building, what we've done is simply take that amount and then divide it by your gross building area. Okay, we've talked about, you know, the idea the gross building area is pretty much the exterior of the building in terms of the square footage that the total building footprint would have on a site. Does that make sense, everybody? All right, so taking this 2.5 million, now you're not going to add in the land cost to calculate the overall construction cost. That's going to be obviously a separate line item. So here we're simply taking the construction loan cost, dividing it by the 10,000 square feet of gross buildable area, and then that's going to give us $250.79 per square foot of construction cost. Okay, make sense? Yep.
Does that include the parking lot?
You could potentially include that, given that that is, you know, part of the property, and not.
Well, it's not going to be part of gross building area.
It's not in the strict sense. I mean, that's a finer point. I mean, it's an excellent point to make. In this model, obviously it's a little bit too simplistic to have included that as a separate line item, but that would be another line item that potentially you would want to include. Okay. And you actually, you know, another way that you probably would do it is you could actually set up the parking lot as a totally separate loan. Okay. Especially if it's an income producing parking lot, like a parking garage, then set that up as a total, you know, single entity that's an income producing entity. Okay, so in this case, we're assuming that land acquisition cost, and once again, sort of lumping all costs associated with acquiring that land of $500,000. So we'd simply be adding the $500,000 to the $2.5 million to give us overall project cost of about $3 million. And then if we were to apply a cap rate to this, just to kind of get a sense for kind of the finished product, what would we have to get in terms of required net operating income on this property on an annual basis? We would need somewhere around $240,000. Okay, does that make sense?
Why would you add a cap rate?
Simply to take a look at what the income would need to be on an annual basis in order to justify that project cost.
Project the value. Okay.
Right. Because all you're doing here is you're taking $3 million, basically divided by 8%, in essence to. I'm sorry, you're taking $3 million times 8% to give us the $240,000. Okay? All right?
If you divide 8% by 240, you should get $10 million.
Yes. Okay? All right, any other questions? Okay, moving forward. All right, so this one is a very basic pro forma. All right. It pretty much, we have just a handful of assumptions that we're going to kind of work through and kind of explain the logic. Give it, hand it up. Okay. So this is a super basic, just 5-year kind of pro forma, and it's on the back side of the other handout. So this one, we're just using a few key pieces of information to populate this 5-year projection. All right, so the first piece of information that we need to know on this one is what is our rental rate per square foot per year for the property. All right, so in this case, $10 a square foot per year. And then how many rentable square feet do we have? Okay, so 10,000 square feet. So all you're going to be doing, in essence, is taking that 10,000 square feet, multiplying it by the $10 per square foot per year rent. So that means that your first year of potential gross income is going to be $100,000. Okay, is everybody cool with that? All right, so that's what this number is, obviously, right here in cell B10. Okay? All right, now, once you've got that, okay, as our starting point, then everything kind of flows from there, okay? So one of before we sort of go down, we're gonna go across just for a moment. So one of the things that we would want to potentially do with a property is maybe build in automatic rental increases or estimate what rental increases might be over the holding period of the loan. And so in this particular case, what I've done is set up growth rates for different line items in the income statement. And this first growth rate is set up to increase the potential gross income at 1% a year for each year subsequent to year one. Okay, does that make sense? Now, in terms of the formula, what it's doing, if you take a look, let's just say year two, it's simply taking year one times basically that growth rate, okay? And then once you're doing that basically you're taking 100,000 times 1% and then adding it back to itself. Okay, does that make sense? Or another way of doing it is you could just simply say 100,000 times 1 plus the growth rate. So times 1.01. Okay, so there's two different ways obviously you can do that. This one is just another way that I've chosen to do it. Okay, I think in the financial modeling class I chose to do it the other way. All right, does everybody understand that?
Yeah.
Okay, now the subsequent years, so we're taking a look then at year 3. Then you're taking the previous year and doing kind of the same thing, multiplying it by the growth rate and then adding it to itself. Okay? Everybody cool? All right. Now, vacancies and collection losses. Okay? Here, we're told up there the vacancy rate is going to be 10%. All right, that's one of the assumptions that we made. And so all you're going to be doing to calculate that is multiplying basically the potential gross income times 10%. That's going to give you $10,000 for that vacancy and collection loss. Okay? Everybody good with that? Okay? Now once again, we've talked about this before, but what is the difference between a vacancy and a collection loss? The vacancy is the property is empty, therefore no rent's coming in. Collection loss is you may have a tenant, but they're just simply not paying the rent. Okay? All right, now with that one, and there are multiple ways to kind of approach this. In this particular model, what I chose to do was to actually say, all right, we've got a situation of where the actual vacancy and collection loss itself is going up at a rate of 3% a year. Okay, in this case, I chose to do it a little bit differently, but basically to the same effect, is I took the previous year in terms of this cell, B11, times 1 plus the growth rate. So two different ways to kind of get at the same exact thing. Why did I do it one way versus the other? It just was what was going through my mind at the time, okay? All right. Now, for each subsequent year, same thing, just like above. Okay, we're just simply multiplying it by the previous year plus the growth rate plus 1. Yep.
Wouldn't, if your vacancy rate is 10, wouldn't it be 10% of 100,000?
Okay, so in this case, and this is what I'm saying, you can approach this in a variety of different ways. Sometimes whenever I build these models, I choose to basically just make it a fixed percentage all the way across. In other cases, I've just simply said, okay, we're going to make the assumption that vacancy and collection losses is just going to increase at some sort of a dollar amount or a fixed percentage, whatever. And part of what I guess I'm trying to demonstrate with that is there's no absolute right way to do that, okay? it all depends on what the individual assumptions are for that particular property, that particular model. But you have to kind of build in that flexibility or that basically lack of flexibility depending on what the circumstances are. Okay? And sometimes I do it that way just to kind of illustrate different ways of doing it so that whenever I'm going through and explaining it, then basically highlight that.
So you're only using that 10% vacancy rate on the
The first
very
year.
first one?
That is correct. From that point forward, it just simply grows at a rate of 3% a year.
But it can decrease as well.
It could. Yeah, and we could have a negative, like for example, if we were to go up here and we were to type in negative 3%. Okay. All right. So moving on. All right. Then we have other income. Now the way that I've got other income set up in this model is what is the other income per month? Okay. Could have done it per year, but I just chose to do it per month. All right. So here, $1,000 per month for that first year, $1,000 a month times 12 months, $12,000. Okay, make sense? All right. And then that one, we've applied a 4% growth rate to. Okay, so we're just simply saying that our other income is going to grow at 4% a year, all the way across. All right. Now, with all of that, then you're going to see what our resulting impact is on our effective gross income. And kind of an interesting thing to sort of point out, we've got our potential gross income growing at 1%, but we've got vacancy and collection losses, which is a bad thing, growing at 3%, but we've got other income growing at 4%. And see what the net effect is in terms, we're still positive in terms of our actual growth rate or our dollar amount from one year to the next. Okay, so that's still a good thing in the sense of income is growing, so it's not an issue of, for example, if we were, let's say, pick up the vacancy and collection loss, I don't know, let's just go something fairly significant, all right? Even with a 9% vacancy and collection loss, we're not growing by much, but we're still growing. Let's pick it, keep it on up to 15%. Okay. So at 15% vacancy and collection loss, that obviously has a substantial enough impact that from one year to the next it is actually declining in terms of our actual effective gross income, which is really the total revenue being brought in. Okay? Make sense? Was. Okay. All right. So that gets us down to effective gross income, and once again, that's just simply a calculation of potential gross income minus the vacancy and collection losses. So you can see the formula there. It's just simply adding those three together, or, well, depending on how we have the vacancy and collection loss set up. In this case, I have it set up as a positive number, so we're actually subtracting it out and then adding in the other income. In other models, you may have it set up to where this is actually a negative number, and then you would simply add them together. Once again, preference on whoever's setting up the model. Okay? Okay. Total operating expenses. Okay? This one is just simply going to be a percentage of your effective gross income. So the operating expense is a percentage of the effective gross income. We're saying that the annual operating expenses are going to be 25% of whatever the effective gross income is, all right, in the first year, okay? But in this model, we're making the assumption that those, from that point forward, the operating expenses are simply going to grow at a rate of 2%, okay, instead of staying as a fixed percentage. But we could, once again, depending on how we build the model, could have set up to where the operating expenses are a fixed percent each year in terms of percentage of EGI. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you look above, once again, total operating expense growth rate of 2%. So that means that here in year 2, you're simply going to be doing kind of what we've done with all the other growth rates. You're taking the previous year, multiplying it by 1 plus the growth rate. Okay? All good? All right, so that gets us down to net operating income. So the math is pretty straightforward. Net operating income line is simply going to be, obviously, the math of taking the effective gross income, subtracting out total operating expenses, and that's going to be obviously the same math all the way across the page. Okay, everybody good with that? Now, annual debt service. Here, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using whatever the lender set minimum debt service coverage ratio is. Okay, in this case, we're saying the lender has set a ratio of 1.2.
That's typically right.
And yes, it's typical if they're going to set one. What they set it at, maybe is not so typical in the sense that 1.2 is maybe kind of, you know, sort of historically what, you know, and for relatively normal, standard, traditional projects, again, in our market now, it's probably closer to 1.3, 1.4, depending on the type of project. So, in this particular case, our debt coverage ratio or debt service coverage ratio is equal to our net operating income divided by annual debt service. So, if we're going to calculate what our maximum annual debt service is, and we're given the minimum debt service coverage ratio by the lender of 1.2, and we know that our net operating income is $76,500, then that means that we can solve for what that maximum annual debt service is. Okay? So if we take the 76,500 and divide by 1.2, we should get the 63,750 for the annual debt service. Now in this model, there's nothing here about what is the loan amount, what is the loan term, the loan interest rate, none of that. That's not what this model is concerned with. This model is just simply saying, what is the maximum debt service that we can have on this property, or not debt service, what is it, what is the maximum annual debt service that we can have on the property, which is the principal and interest payments. Okay, does that make sense? Now, we could use that information, the 63,750, and back into what would be the maximum loan amount we could get on this property by saying, well, what is the interest rate, what is the term, and then ultimately, you know, figure out, okay, the maximum loan amount is X number of dollars based on that. But that's not what this model is actually doing. Okay, make sense? Okay, and the last little piece of this is just simply taking and subtracting out the annual debt service from the net operating income to see how much before tax cash flow that we have left over at the end of each year. Now, one thing to sort of point out here, and the reason for kind of these little green triangles, is what we're doing, unlike what we've done before, is we're just simply holding that annual debt service amount constant all the way throughout. In other words, we're not changing it, okay? Because we're not basing it, we're basing it on strictly the first year's net operating income, not the subsequent years. Okay, make sense? Okay. And then that simply tells us then what our before tax cash flow is going to be from 1 year to next. Okay. Any questions on this little model? So once again, you know, should just be able to kind of plug and play with the different assumptions and kind of go from there. Yeah. No questions? Kind of scare me a little bit. Okay. Okay, moving forward. Okay, the third model is basically the sort of basic mortgage model. And this model, strange enough, what I did, for most of you that have Excel, you probably have an existing template within Excel that has this base model. It doesn't have this part over here kind of to the right in terms of the origination fees and that sort of thing. It doesn't have like this part, the interest rate, lender's cash flow, and effective cost of borrowing columns, but it has everything else, okay? If you know, but I've obviously provided you with the full model that they have plus what I've added to it. But it's kind of interesting with what they set it up. One of the cool things is they sort of show you that, you know, for this particular loan, 30-year loan with $1 million interest rate at 5% interest, look at that nice little pie chart there. I mean, you know, we've talked about this before, but I mean, you know, in terms of your total out-of-pocket expenditures over the life of that loan, 44% is going just toward interest. And that's at a 5% interest rate, okay? I mean, imagine you jack that interest rate up a little bit. So we do a 10% interest rate, you know, 64% interest. I mean, that's crazy. Okay, all right. So, what is this model? What kind of information is it collecting? And then what does it do? Okay, so the inputs over here to the left are obviously the loan amount, the interest rate, the loan term in years, anywhere from 1 year all the way to 30 years. And then it asks you for basically the beginning start date of the loan in terms of sort of the month, day, and year. And that's obviously for the purpose of just simply putting over here an actual calendar feature. And then one of the new things this one introduces that we didn't do in the financial modeling class is this one has the option of making extra payments, okay? So in other words, on top of the normal mortgage payment, you could make an extra $1,000 a month, and if we were to make that zero, okay, you know, if you were to make that zero, it really doesn't change the total amount of interest that you paid that much. I mean, in the sense it goes from 44% interest to 48% interest without those extra payments. But the point being is this is a way for you to kind of, for example, one of the things that historically has been the case, and we're going to see how this maybe changes as a result of the new tax laws, but one of the things that a lot of people on their home mortgages tended to do was whenever they got back their mortgage refund check at the end of the, or not mortgage, their income tax refund check at the whenever it comes in the mail, then they would simply say, okay, we're going to take that and we're going to apply that whole check as a lump sum payment to our mortgage to try to, you know, basically reduce the mortgage balance a little bit and kind of, you know, take a few months off of the term and that sort of thing to be sort of financially prudent and so forth. And so this model simply allows you to do that. You can kind of either go in and just put in one extra payment a year or make it where it's just a fixed extra dollar amount each and every month. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah? Put that back. All right, so down here, these are all obviously given calculations that the model does. And so in this case, it tells you how much the normal mortgage payment is going to be, okay? And the scheduled number of mortgage payments of 360 months. But this is kind of a neat feature, and you know, you caught wind of it because I heard you mention it, that by virtue of making that extra $1,000 a month extra payment, what that actually does is that reduces your total number of actual payments down to 356. So you only are really shaving off 4 months, okay? So one has to begin to question, well, is it really worth it? Okay? Now, in this case, we also are going to be potentially, you know, if we were paying off the loan early, then, you know, what would that be in terms of the total of, let's double check here, because I think.
So that extra payment like cut off for number of payments? Actually?
Yes.
But it doesn't have any effect on the principal and interest. It still remains constant. Like in a home loan, some loans, if you pay an extra payment, it'll go towards principal.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so all of this number is doing is it's saying, okay, if you did make those extra payments of $1,000 a month, that'd be a total of $356,000 worth of payments.
Right.
So in other words, let's just change that number to 0. And obviously that changes the total of early payments to 0. Obviously then kicks back to 360 as the full total number of actual payments, and then the total interest, it just simply tells you, well, what that dollar amount would be.
Just decreasing your,
right.
Your number of payments.
Yeah. Okay. Now, let's go over here kind of to the right side, the part that I actually added into the model. All right. So as we have talked about in this class, there are three fundamental ways the lender makes money above and beyond whatever the stated interest rate is on the loan. And those three ways are basically charging upfront loan origination fees or discount points, monthly administrative servicing fees, and then prepayment penalty fees, okay? So none of that's new in terms of what obviously those are. Now, for this model, we've obviously got, those are inputs, and then we've also got the input of, what if we have a prepayment on the loan? And when does that prepayment potentially occur? So in this case, we're saying that we're going to prepay this loan at the end of month 60, or basically the end of year 5, all right? And what we want to know, what we're really solving for, it's not an input, it's actually an output, is what is that effective cost of borrowing or the lender's yield, okay? Which is a 7.37%. Now the question is, how do we get there, okay? And for those of you taking the financial modeling class, you understand all of this, that's okay. What we're going to do in this class is just simply walk through, in essence, what's really taking place, okay? So, first things first. One of the things that we've got to establish, and if you remember this from when we did it using a calculator, is we've got to establish how much money is the lender actually dispersing whenever they make the loan up front, all right? Technically, yeah, they're loaning you $1 million, but
There's 2%.
there's a 2% loan origination fee on that $1 million. So that, in essence, is going to be $20,000. Okay, so what that means, that's going to be the loan origination fee. So you're going to have to subtract that from the $1 million, meaning the lender is really only dispersing $980,000. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's the reason for this lender cash flow here of $980,000 as a dispersal. Now just take a look here just for a second, and you can do this with a model right in front of you, that if you were to go and you were to change this origination fees to 0, okay, well, technically, hold on here, there we go, all right, then in essence, it just simply makes the loan dispersal the full $1 million, okay, does that make sense? Okay, and so anything that we then make it, put it back to the 2%, okay, that takes it back down to the 980, okay? Any questions about that? Now, in terms of the formula, okay, here they're simply taking the loan amount and then multiplying the loan amount times that 2% in essence because it is a negative loan amount, you get the equal minus negative loan amount plus the positive, and that allows it to then calculate that 980. Okay? All right, now, from the lender's cash flow perspective, this next line item, just to sort of see where that number is coming from. You've got, covering it up there. So you've got 60, 68, 68, 22. Okay, so where's that number coming from? All right, well, if you sort of take a look, you've got the scheduled payment of the 53, 68, 22. And you've got the $1,000 extra payment, but you've also got up there a monthly servicing fee of $500. So this is the extra, this is the servicing, and this is the payment. So all of that added together should be the 68, 68, 22. Okay? Does that make sense, everybody?
I have a general question just about prepayment fees.
Yep. We're not there yet.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, let me We're not there yet.
Okay.
Okay. Now, once we've got what the payment is going to be to the lender each month, and that's going to be the same thing all the way down the page, okay? So you're seeing that basically all they're doing is just adding that stuff together. Now, what is going to happen here at month 60, oops, is we're going to have a payoff. Okay? Now the payoff at month 60 is going to be an accumulation of what is the outstanding mortgage balance plus what is the total amount of payment plus extra payment plus monthly servicing fee plus the prepayment fee, okay, which gets into RJ's question, okay? So at this point, you're going to have all of that added together, okay? So you've got this as the payment piece, okay, of that total amount, but you've also got the balance, which is the 869. .04. Okay, so this is our payment plus our balance, and then we said on top of that, then we also have the prepayment penalty, okay, which in this case is going to be 8% of this amount here. So times 8% prepay. Okay, let's get that. So 860, 869.04 times 8%. So the prepayment amount is going to be $68,869.52. All right. Does that make sense? So now what we're going to do is we're going to add the payment, the final payment for that month, plus the balance of the loan, plus the actual prepayment amount together. And let's just see if I've done this correctly.
I think the payment's small.
This is the last payment.
So 936. Oh. 606.78. And what do we have over here?
The payment is wrong. It's not 68, 68. It's 603.
Oh, yep, okay, that's right. For that month, it's different. I was trying to shortcut and I made a mistake. Okay. So the payment was $5,038.40 for that month. That's what I get for trying to shortcut the process. Okay. 5,038.40. All right. Which would be 65,38.40. Plus 860, 869.04 plus 68, 869.02, 936, 276, 96. Does that match up?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Thanks for pointing that out. Okay. All right. Now, Robert, RJ.
My question is just, are prepayment penalty expenses, are they typically fixed, or does that percentage vary on loan underwriting?
It varies.
It varies?
It varies.
What about with origination fees? Are they?
Same thing.
Really?
Well, I mean, once again, it depends on, depends on the size of the loan, depends on the complexity of the loan.
Yeah.
Depends on, what kind of lender it is. you know, I mean, a whole variety of
Yeah,
factors.
I mean, it definitely makes sense for prepayment penalties, but for loan origination fees.
Well, think about, okay,
It's
think-
just
think about-
admin costs, so you
Think
wouldn't
about it
have-
like this. In terms of paperwork, just purely paperwork cost, there probably isn't, in terms of dollar amount difference, that much dollar amount difference of doing the paperwork for $1 million loan or a $10 million loan.
Yeah,
But the question is whether or not the lender is going to charge you the same fixed dollar amount for one versus the other, or whether they're just simply going to say, we're simply going to charge you whatever it is, 2% or 3% or whatever, you know, fixed rate they choose to charge. Much the same way that you can sort of look at brokerage fees. That, you know, sometimes with higher end properties or, you know, obviously higher dollar value properties, whether it's residential or commercial, that whatever maybe the standard normal, if there is kind of a standard normal commission rate, that it may go down somewhat as the value of the properties go up.
okay.
I mean, every market's different, you know, and realtors are hypersensitive about that sort of thing, you know, in terms of you know, ensuring that they say, yeah, no, we're not, you know, price fixing within a particular, you know, market as to that everybody knows that the 6% is the stated commission, but yet if you go above a certain price point, it may drop down to 5% or 4% or 3% or 2%, depending on the actual dollar amount of the transaction.
Okay.
Okay? All right, now, one of the things to sort of point out here, and this is what we spend some time doing in the financial modeling class, is how do we get Excel to kind of figure out, if you will, you know, what month the actual loan is prepaid and when we should do these sort of calculations. Well, one of the things that you should do is, you know, just in this particular cell specifically, is if you kind of highlight it, what you're going to see is an if-then sort of statement. And what this allows you to do, and we're going to spend any time in it on this course, so we spend the time in it on the financial modeling course, is this if-then statement allows us to perform these sort of logical kind of transactions of saying, okay, if this happens to be the month in which the loan is prepaid, then we want you to add the balance of the loan, and we want to add in the prepayment amount to calculate a total payoff amount. If it is not the month of the prepayment, then all we need in that cell is just the payment amount for that month. Does that make sense conceptually? Okay? All right, so that is just an embedded sort of if-then statement that is basically calculated all throughout the actual cash flows. Okay. Now, another little interesting thing is over here, to calculate our effective cost of borrowing, what we're doing in essence is we're taking and we're setting up the cash flows for the lender and then calculating an internal rate of return for those cash flows. So this effective cost of borrowing column, if you sort of, you know, scroll up and scroll down, what you're going to see is, if we were to highlight just one of those months, specifically this one, there we go, then what it's doing is it's capturing all of the cash flows, starting with the lender dispersal all the way through. Now, obviously you don't see them because they're hidden off the screen, but that first 60 months worth of cash flows, and simply putting those into the internal rate of return and then solving for internal rate of return. Does that make sense? And the decimal thing over here, one of the things that Excel is kind of quirky about is they want you to provide some sort of a guess as to what basically the rate of return is. And it's really kind of a holdover, I think, from the late 80s, whenever, in terms of how they did the calculations. But in essence, whenever you calculate internal rate of return, both in your calculator as well as in Excel, it's playing a high-low game. It's basically internally, you don't see it, obviously it's all behind the scenes, but it's basically, it's saying, okay, well, is it this amount? No, it's higher than that. Okay, well, is it this amount? No, it's lower than that, you know, and it does this iterative process to where it narrows it down to what the actual value is. And what that interest rate, or this little guess, is supposedly doing is it's a seed value to kind of begin the process and then play from there.
So you pick a little minute value.
Yeah, and then it just basically takes care of the rest. It's really, as I said, it's kind of a silly thing, at least that's been my experience. There's really been no real practical value of it. It's just kind of, I'm sure that there's probably somebody that would give a much more eloquent explanation as to, you know, what the real material value of that is, but, you know, I've never seen it, other than what I was describing, okay? All right. So now, one of the other little cool features of this particular model is if you take a look and you actually click on the effective borrowing cost or yield, the formula that it pops back is kind of an interesting one that you probably have never seen before unless you're in a modeling class, and that's using the index function. Okay? And what the index function allows you to do is basically you're saying, all right, I need to pull a value from this range of data. And the range, obviously, is kind of the beginning of the range to the end of the range. All right? But you specifically are wanting to pull the value for month 60. Okay? So, in other words, the cell N7, where you've got the ranges L18 to L377, which is all of this whole column, okay, then we're saying pull the value for month number 60 or value number 60 within that range. Does that make sense? Because that is the actual payoff, okay? And that's the value specifically right here for month 60, okay? Doesn't really show it here on this screen, but in essence, trust me, it's month 160 or month 60, okay?
If this model was for 5 years or 60 months, why is there like 61? After you pay it off, why is there still?
That's an interesting point, that you could create the model where it's self-destructive, and what I mean by that is that once you built it, then it would basically erase everything from that point forward. But the problem with that is, well, if you want to keep using it over and over and over again, you probably don't want it to self-destruct because it would have to rebuild itself. So it's best just to go ahead and just kind of have the model there for the entire 360 months that you only really use the first 60.
But you also, you said you added on those last 3 columns.
Correct.
So that's an addition to.
Right. Now, the other piece, sort of the final piece, if you will, that I did to this model was I inserted this column, an interest rate column. All right, so this allows you to change whatever your base rate of interest is to something else. And if you look at what the first one is, it's just simply cell referencing, obviously, what the interest rate is up here. But from that point forward, it's simply cell referencing, or should be, excuse me, cell referencing the previous. So let's just see what happens here if we change this to 6%. Oh, okay, it doesn't. Okay, so it's still separate cell referencing the original one. But this would allow you by hand, unlike the other model that we created in the financial modeling class, this one you would go through month by month, potentially change what the interest rate is. And as a result of those changes, then that would recalculate what the interest is, what the payoff amount would be, and so forth, so on. Does that make sense? To make it, in essence, a variable rate model. Okay. Let's see, what else here? That's pretty much it for this model. Okay, any questions? Very good. Okay, so the quiz. Okay, and you're gonna need your spreadsheets, your computers. You're welcome to do it by hand, you can do it by hand, but it'll be a lot easier to use spreadsheets.
You're on the edge.
And I will be giving you your answer sheets here in a second. Oh, okay. What about your iPad? Can you use that?
The cells won't open, I can use that.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe. The what?
I'm gonna say it in my computer.
Oh,
Oh, wait, I'll take it.
just change the font color. Anyway, not, but no, you can one, yes. I believe so. Yep. Yep.
Before I came in.
Oh.
I tried.
It only took $3 now.
Yeah, the Starbucks. Where's the weekend? If you
Same place we went to eat.
Yeah, if you walk around the key code, like, all those steps. If you get a sandwich shop, you walk around.
Which is the cafeteria.
Yeah. Okay. You walk around there, there's a Starbucks.
Here's yours.
So that's pays off the interest.
What's that?
So that extra payment is so that's why I said
Yeah.
it's so high.
Metropolitan Property Group, eles trabalham também muito com investimento, trabalham com property management. Pessoal, chegando em Nova York, bem lá.
Yeah, your text? Huh? Oh, the textbook.
The tax plan, the insurance.
No. Okay. You can do it. It's not. We're waiting a little bit. If you want to, go ahead and take a look at the assignment or the presentation for next week and read over that, and then start go ahead and start working on that while we're waiting a few more minutes.
What's that?
It is what they say, it's for
No, no.
get started here in a few minutes. Once again, go ahead and take a look at the details for your individual assignment presentation for next week, the handout, and we'll talk about that here. But, if you want to, we'll start working on it.
I'm just reading this. It says whatever, the presentation's 10% of your final grade, so are the quiz and test grades, it's 90%?
As per the syllabus.
Yeah.
Do we need to sign up for the free trial to get?
Yes. It doesn't cost anything, it's easy, it's a little bit straightforward. All right, so you tell me.
There's one like this in 20 grand too, though. They're both being lost.
Okay, we're going to talk about the individual presentation / project that's going to be due next week, but first we're going to go ahead and do the new material through the quiz, and then that will give us enough time to kind of focus on that at the tail end. Okay, so we finally made it to the last chapter, okay? This will be the last quiz. I know you're excited.
Definitely.
Rusty Payne. Okay. So this quiz and the chapter got a few little conceptual questions and a few little computational questions. All right. So one of the first things, and we've I think talked about this before, that when you're doing land development specifically, when you're doing raw land development, in many cases, you're having to comply with local land use regulations as to the number of, let's say, units that you can place on an acre of land and that sort of thing. And so one of the measures that, and I was very proud of you whenever Pike Rowley came in, that you actually remembered how many square feet are in an acre. Because that is an important number to remember. So once again, how many square feet are in an acre? 43,560 square feet equals 1 acre of land. Okay. Now, one of the things that, as I said, local governments tend to do is they, as part of their sort of their land use guidelines, and those of you that have probably taken the land use planning class, which many of you, I'm assuming that you guys probably talked a little bit about sort of density guidelines in terms of, from, that in one particular location, depending on what kind of product that you're developing, like if you're developing, garden style, multifamily residential, there's a different sort of density requirement than there is for, let's say, high-rise residential versus single-family residential and so forth, so on. I'm assuming you guys talked about that kind of stuff in the land use planning class. Now, so in here, just a real quick sort of calculation. Let's assume, okay, how many, let's say, apartment units total would you like to build? Give me a number.
20.
20. Give me a higher number.
100.
320.
Around them.
In 1 acre, you mean?
No, just how many total would you like to build?
150, yeah.
Okay, I like the higher number. 350. All right? So you want to build 350 apartment units. All right? And the density requirement for the city is 20 units per acre. Okay? So, simple question. How many acres of land do you need? More than one.
17.5.
Okay.
17.5.
In this case, 350 apartment units, and we can do 20 of those per acre. So you have 17.5 acres of land. Okay, and in this case, let's just say, what if I asked you then how many square feet of land would that be?
You will multiply 17.5 by 46.5%.
43,560.
43.
And if land was selling at $5 an acre, I'm sorry, $5 per square foot. My bad. $5 an acre, that'd be a heck of a deal. Major swampland. Okay, 762, 300 times 5. So $3,811,500 for your land cost.
That's $5 an acre, that's what this is?
$5 per square foot.
Oh, square foot.
I said acre, I meant square foot. Okay, make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, moving forward. Okay, one of the topics and concepts that you need to be familiar with as a developer is sort of the build-to-suit sort of product type. And what we mean by build-to-suit is you have an actual tenant in mind. Now this could be, once again, for residential or for commercial, okay? It could be, once again, it could be an industrial project, it could, but in essence, you've already got a client, you've got a tenant, you've got somebody that you're actually building the product for, okay? Now, if that's the case, that's different from kind of the whole colloquial kind of build it and they will come sort of model, in the sense of, you build it and you just sort of hope that there's a market out there for a product and that you're going to end up populating it with whoever happens to show up and sign a lease, okay? And in those two different approaches, one would expect that there's a lot more risk in that whole kind of, build it, they will come, in other words, the spec building, okay? Speculative building, than there is with the build-to-suit. The reason I'm kind of, going through this is, if you can capture a tenant up front for a property in a build-to-suit situation, chances are you could, if you chose to, as a developer, probably give them a better deal because you know that you're going to probably lease it immediately upon getting your occupancy permit, okay? Versus speculative building, the project could very well sit there after it's completed, after you've got your occupancy permit for several months before you finally find the tenant that's going to be appropriate for that space. Plus, you know, the whole spec construction thing, I mean, you know, you really are banking that you're going to find a tenant. And your lender is willing to somehow accept that as well, that, you know, there's going to be that magical, you know, tenant that's out there that's going to be, you know, waiting to populate the space. But the point of what we're sort of focused on here, kind of from the finance point of view, is really, are you willing, or how much of a discount might you be willing to give under kind of a build-to-suit sort of environment versus sort of spec construction? Does that make sense conceptually? Okay, so how do we kind of begin to operationalize that? Well, what I would tend to sort of say is that, let's say that it might take you 12 months to lease up a property versus being able to have immediate occupancy with a build-to-suit tenant. All right, so if that's the case, let's say that first of all, how big of a project do we have? Square footage.
10,000.
Okay, 10,000 square feet. All right, if we've got 10,000 square feet, and let's assume that the market rental rates are what, per square foot per year? $25. All right, and how long of a lease might we do?
4.
Okay, so is that going to be for the spec tenant or for potentially the build-to-suit tenant?
Build-to-suit.
Okay, so a 4-year lease for the build-to-suit and a 3-year lease for sort of a spec tenant. Okay. Now, under those conditions, let's say what sort of a discount rate we want to apply. Let's say 5%. And the cash flows that we get from the build-to-suit tenant, simply put, you're going to have year 1, year 2, year 3, and year 4. So you're going to get on the build-to-suit, you're going to get whatever those cash flows are for each of those 4 years. But for the spec tenant, you're going to get $0 for the first year, and you're not going to collect rent until years 2, 3, and 4. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, yep.
I have a question though. But if you are building a spec kind of complex, right, to rent it out, wouldn't that be like there would be no delay as soon as you purchase the land, you kind of know what the project is going on there. In retrospect, you build a suit and you have to wait till you find a client that wants to give you his archetype or his plan of what he wants to build it. Wouldn't that be the same kind of, you know, because if you see a lot of signs that's built to suit on the land because they're waiting for someone to come there to take over the land, right? So that
In some cases, yes.
in some cases it'd be the same thing almost with the spec, and you might get more, like you might get a quicker tenant in the spec than you would get in a build to suit, right?
One could make that argument,
Okay.
but you also don't have the capital commitment with the build-to-suit that you do with the spec tenant.
But you're losing value if you're not building it though, right?
You're losing value, but that holding cost may not be that much of the land. So, I mean, you can look at, I mean, once again, that's a valid assumption, but, you know, there are a variety of different ways to look at it. I mean, there's I really haven't investigated it, but I see it every single day over here right off of Davie Road. There's a new industrial project, a warehouse project, massive, industrial warehouse building, and it's brand new, hasn't even been fully completed, and it's spec. Go sign the front window for lease.
Right.
I was shocked. I mean, I was like, somebody actually built that, you know, without potentially having a tenant in mind, or the tenant they had in mind fell through, or, you know, whatever. It was sort of surprising to me, except, you know, when you do think about it, there is a pretty substantial demand for industrial property. So, but, you know, the location where it's at is also sort of questionable. But anyway, but my point being is, you know,
You can do both.
you can do both, but it's just, it's a question of, from an analytical point of view, if we're sort of looking at it, you know, here are kind of the trade-offs, this is part of what we've got to sort of consider. All right, so in this case, and we assume that the market rents are gonna stay at the $25 a square foot, let's take a look at what the actual cash flows would be here. Okay? So 25,000, basically, yeah. So $25 times 10,000 square feet, so 250,000. Here, this is sort of start with this. Or make some adjustments to this, but that's one kind of. So this is kind of what we're sort of saying, if we were to charge them the same amount, okay, in terms of the base rent. Okay, everybody comfortable with that? Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to look at, well, what is the present value of those two sort of scenarios, the build to suit versus the spec, using that 5% discount rate. So it becomes a cash flow, okay? Or you could set it up as an annuity, but it gets complicated because of the first year being 0. So what you're going to in essence do, one payment per year, you're going to, and for the build to suit, it's going to be 0 as the initial cash flow, and then the 250,000 as a cash flow for 4 years, so 4 shift in sub J, and then you're going to have 5% as your interest rate, and then you're going to solve for what is the net present value. Okay, so start with that. Okay, and then for the spec, you're going to have 0 for the initial cash flow, but you're also going to have 0 for cash flow for year 1. Then you're going to have the 250,000 as a cash flow for 3 years at the 5%. I must have done the first one wrong.
Yeah.
Something.
86, 486.
Doesn't look close to what it probably should be.
I'm sitting here driving myself crazy. I can't get the number. 886.
86, yeah.
86,
47.
47.
There we go. 886, 487, 63. Okay. So let's just start out and just look at the simple difference between the two. So 886, 487, 63, minus 648, 392, 39. Okay. So roughly 238,095, 24. Okay, of an absolute difference in the discounted value between the two. Okay, does everybody see that? Okay.
Does that mean that's the discount that they can get, right?
Well, that's the dollar value of the present value of the discount, okay? So, in this particular case, how much of a rental discount could you offer the build-to-suit tenant up front in dollars per square foot per year to be equivalent to the speculative tenant?
The difference.
Yeah.
The difference
What?
between the two.
So the
The
difference
difference
is divided for the square foot.
Well, you're looking for a payment, right?
The two LTVs. The difference.
If you just divide 886 by 648, you'll get it.
No, rest. To start.
You give as much
The
as
86 minus 848, 648, and then plus
If you give as much as $280.
Okay.
Discount.
So this is the present value of the discount, all inclusive up front, okay? But if you remember, what we've got to do is we're gonna have to basically take this amount, put it in at 5% for 5 years and solve for payment.
Will be monthly? Well,
No, it'll be annual.
why 5 years?
Because we're gonna, this is the present value savings
Okay.
up front, so we've got to spread that savings out over the entire term to adjust the rental rate. So 1 payment per year,
That's present value, right?
we're going to take the 238,095.24, put that in as present value over 5 years. Oops, so not 5 years, 5% is what I'm trying to say.
And family.
5% interest rate over 4 years, and then solve for payment. So that would be 67,145.67. That would be the annual discount, but we want it per square foot. So we have to divide that by, how many square feet do we say we had?
Got that one.
So $6.71 per square foot per year. So in essence, what we're saying is that if the rental rate, the stated rental rate or the market rate is $25 a square foot, we can give them a $6.71 or $6.71 discount per year, which means that really what we're saying is the actual rental rate that they would be charged would be like $18.29. But if I'm asking just for the discount piece, that would be the answer. Does that make sense?
And in the question, did you say 4 years? That was the,
Well, you've got to make it equivalent.
oh, okay. Okay, I see.
So if you ask for the total amount, it's 18, and if if you ask for the discount, it's 6.7.
Correct.
What do you mean plus one?
Well, okay, in other words, if the stated rental rate is $25 a square foot, and we're knocking $6.71 a square foot off of that, then the actual amount that they would be paying us would be $18.29. There's this question of what I'm going to be asking, whether I'm going to be asking for the discount, or I'm going to be asking for the effective rent.
Any hint?
So
You can figure it out.
the full
Okay.
price is $25 and the effective rent is
Correct.
$18.29.
Correct. Correct. Okay, moving forward. Okay, here, the next one deals with construction draws. In this case, this is my opportunity to prove, or you to prove to me that you can actually do the math that's affiliated with the construction loans without using your computer, with using instead just your calculator. All right? So, let's say we'll keep it relatively simple. But how much do you want your monthly construction draws to be? 75 what? Okay, so $75,000 a month in construction draws. Okay, what do you want your interest rate to be? 7.25% interest rate. All right, and how many months you want the construction period to be?
36.
12 months, okay? All right, so now the question is, how much do you owe the lender at the end of that 12 months under those conditions? Assuming that the first draw occurs at the end of the month. It's not complicated. Eduardo's looking at me like, no, this is really normal. Trust me, it's pretty straightforward.
If the first is the end,
In other words, your first payment or your first draw is going to occur at the end of the first month.
One shift end.
Hmm?
One shift end.
so it's just
So
solve it for future value.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's all you're doing. Okay, so in this case, it's going to be 12 payments per year. And the payment amount is going to be $75,000. Your interest rate is going to be 7.25% interest. And in this case, your term is going to be 12N for 12 months. And then simply solve for future value.
You wouldn't make that negative, the 75,000?
You could. Doesn't really matter for this problem. Does that make sense, everybody? Yes or no? Because you're accumulating basically $75,000 each and every month for 12 months, and then you're paying 7.25% interest on that each and every month.
Yeah, but if you do 12 payments a year and 12 numbers, isn't that 144 payments?
Oh,
Yeah.
no.
That's fine.
No, that's right.
Because you'd have.
You had me thinking for a second. No, 12, not 12 shift in, 12 in. That's only 12 months.
Or one shift then, right?
You come
Or one shift in,
Yeah.
either way. So you got? Okay, so let's just, once again, just for fun, do the simple math. 75,000 times 12. It's the $900,000 in total draws. So basically our interest cost over that period, $30,516.80. Okay, make sense? Yep.
first payment will be at the end of the second month.
That makes it more complicated. Then we have to set up as a series of cash flows. And we can do that.
Well, we don't.
No, we can do that. No, it's actually, no. Hold on. Now, this is a very good teachable moment on this specifically. So what if, instead of these being fixed payments, what if they are, like the Excel example, they're variable amounts each month? Well, you're doing them as cash flow, but think about this. We're not solving for net present value. We're in essence solving for net future value. So how do you get that number?
You take the NPV first, and then you turn around and.
Yes, you take the NPV, once you've got the NPV, and you put that in as your present value, then you put in whatever the interest rate was in the term, and then solve for future value, and that's going to give you your net future value. So that would be the way to accomplish what you proposed. Okay? One of the sort of subsequent versions of financial calculators that HP produced, one of the more advanced versions, actually has a net future value function. This one doesn't, but it's, once again, fairly easy to solve for. And it's very seldom that we probably end up using that in real estate except for construction loans, which you're probably going to use Excel for.
I was just thinking, because the spreadsheet actually you talk about the interest date on the end of the second month.
Yeah, so in other words, the month on the, for that first month, the interest on that doesn't accumulate until that following month. Okay. Okay, any questions? Good? All right. What are holdbacks?
Milestones. Milestones?
Okay. Set usually by who?
Well, the lender, they want to make sure that you're using the money, like, for whatever reason, if it's like, they usually have, like in different countries, they have rules, like they say, when you do a third floor, they'll give you this payment.
Okay, fair enough. So yeah, as you're saying, sort of milestones that until you reach that particular milestone or that particular achievement, that particular whatever, you're not going to get your money. And so we're going to hold it back until you reach that point. So the lender, I'm sorry?
Control of risk.
It controls risk. So from the perspective of the lender, the whole idea behind the holdback is it's a way of helping the lender to control the risk and to minimize their risk for the project. Does that make sense? Okay, so it's just simply a nice little conceptual thing to lock in. Okay, moving forward. All right, one of my favorite little topics are option contracts. Specifically using option contracts for land assembly. So this is kind of one of those things that if you're doing large-scale land development, meaning that you know, historically, this is whenever you're like trying to assemble land for an airport, or you're trying to assemble land for a big shopping mall, or trying to assemble land for a major residential subdivision, or whatever. Chances are, you may have to buy multiple parcels of land and combine them. Okay, simple concept, but yet not so simple necessarily in reality, because usually one of the big problems that you face is the holdout. Okay, the person who, you know, in essence says, I want to sell, or I want to sell at a ridiculously inflated price. And so what, you know, in a lot of cases will happen as a matter of practice, and this is certainly the case historically, now it's certainly becoming a lot more challenging to be able to do this. And that is, let's say that I am, you know, multi-billionaire sort of developer, and I decided I need to acquire, you know, several hundreds, if not thousands of acres of land for my new whatever it is, airport, shopping mall, you fill in the blank. And all of a sudden, I, in my name, go out there and start trying to acquire these parcels, immediately you know what's going to happen. Everybody's going to see, okay, billionaire buying up land, let's raise the prices to ridiculously high levels and preclude them from being able to assemble what they need to assemble. So instead, more than likely what I will do, or historically I would have done, is I would have hired a whole bunch of basically land assembly people, have them all sign confidentiality agreements, and each one of them would go out in some sort of a pseudo name, pseudo interest, and start quietly assembling these parcels of land. So you would maybe get parcel number 1, parcel number 2, parcel number 3, 4, so on and so forth. And then once we kind of quietly had assembled these, then we're good to go to be able to put them together. Now, but as part of that process, we still want to try to minimize our risk, because we don't inherently want to go out and necessarily give full cash payment for each of those parcels until we know we can fully assemble all of them, okay? Because we don't want to be left in a situation of where, we've put out potentially millions of dollars buying this land, only to find out one of the key pieces of land that we really need, we can't get a hold of for whatever reason. So we usually have to structure these things, where we have like an option contract, an option to purchase, whether it's over 6 months, 9 months, a year, depending on how complicated we think those acquisitions are going to be. But from our perspective, yeah, we potentially maybe want to acquire these as quickly as possible, because once adjacent property owners start talking amongst themselves, they're going to be saying, well, did you get an offer for your land? Did you get an offer for your land? And all of a sudden everything sort of bubbles up, and it becomes to be problematic for the land assembly folks. So and what we're sort of talking about, here's the parcel of the land that we need, but as we were sort of saying, we've got parcel A, parcel B, C, maybe D, and E. And so with those option contracts, we might be able to go in for 1%, maybe 2%, maybe 3% of the overall value of that piece of land, and say, look, we're going to give you this dollar amount to tie up your land for the next 6 months, 9 months, year, whatever. But you're going to guarantee you're going to sell it to us at this price within that particular period of time. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, once again, if let's say I'm using you guys as the brokers for the deal to acquire the land, but let's say Marielle is one of the landowners. Do you necessarily want to tie up your land and preclude it from being sold for the next 6 months, 9 months, or a year? Probably not. I mean, unless you're going to get paid substantially for doing so, and is giving you 1% of the value up front necessarily sufficient? You've got to make that determination. And what are you going to make that determination on? You're going to make that determination on how buoyant maybe is the market now, and maybe kind of what you foresee within the next several months. If you've got no offers whatsoever for the past, several years, and all of a sudden this one just sort of pops up out of nowhere, you might be more inclined to just simply say, okay, yeah, sure, I'll take the money and agree on a price and potentially, sell it to you within, 6 months. But if there's been a lot of activity, there's a good chance that, that option price, if you will, is going to escalate. Okay, does that make sense? Any other factors that you think would sort of drive that option price? The price that you're going to pay to get the right to be able to buy the land. Well, we sort of, number one, the underlying value of the land.
Right.
Number two, probably the length of the option. In other words, how many days or how many months do they have to basically take it off the market? Also, you're probably going to be looking at things like the volatility of the market in terms of how much in terms of price swings have there been, on land prices historically. What else might you consider?
I mean, obviously the size
square footage.
Yeah, well, sure, that should be inherent though
Yeah.
within the underlying value of the land.
How about the quality of the land?
Yeah,
Class type?
I'm sorry?
The class type?
Yeah, possibly, you know, if it's just being used for agricultural versus, you know, it's actually maybe prime, you know, infill land.
That's all relative to value anyway.
Sure, but at the ultimate, you know, at the end of the day, yeah, the underlying value
Value
is.
is high.
But part of, you know, what you're going to be also sort of considering is, well, you know, what is the current market value, but you would also probably want to consider what might be the market value at the end of the option period. Because, you know, if it's worth $50,000 an acre today, it might be worth $60,000 6 months from now. You know, and so to what extent we would want to maybe factor that into the pricing of that option. I'm saying all of this, not to try to make it more sophisticated than what it inherently needs to be, but if Mary Ellen is a rational, you know, owner, she is going to probably at least inherently try to take some of that, you know, into consideration whenever saying what is she willing to agree to, you know, in terms of that upfront option price. I mean, wouldn't you agree? I mean, now you could also just kind of be completely crazy and say, yeah, I want, you know, a much, much higher percentage than any of that would even lend itself to, you know, but then that could potentially drive the developer away. And, you know, just sort of depends on, well, how badly she wants to sell it or if she wants to sell it at all.
Could you structure it out for the first 6 months, you can raise the percentage, like you can actually get more?
Possibly. I mean, you could have like, you know, an extension on the option period that, you know, if we don't buy within the first, you know, 6 months, we're going to give you an extra percentage or an extra dollar amount, you know, at the conclusion of that. I'm just, you know, sort of just throwing some of these things out there because these are just things you should be aware of. Okay, so. But the whole idea behind the option contracts is you're going to use these whenever you've got multiple owners involved, whenever you're trying to do large-scale land assembly. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, moving forward.
Can you also use an option contract to process the land through a rezoning?
Yes. That's another, it's a good point. You could say, all right, I want to buy your land. Your land is currently zoned for agricultural use, but it's worthless to me as agricultural. It's only valuable to me if I can build houses on it, or I can build a shopping center or industrial building, whatever. And so I'm going to engage with you a 120-day or whatever option contract that contingent on rezoning. And if either I or you can get the property rezoned within that particular period of time, here's the amount that I'm willing to pay. And that's a common practice. Now the question is, who takes on that responsibility of the rezoning? In some cases it's the developer, in some cases it's the landowner.
Usually the application is on the name of the owner, right?
Right, the application can be in the name of the owner, but the point being is the developer may be the one paying for it, driving it, or pushing it along, because the owner may say, I don't really care. You know, I'm happy with it being agricultural. Because I'm doing whatever farming I'm doing on it. I don't really intend on, developing anything on it. So you're coming to me saying you want to do all this stuff, well, then pay for it. Okay? Okay. So one of the things that a lender may require you to have in place whenever you're doing possibly a project that has multiple sales of multiple units, whether they're condominium units, whether they're single-family residential units, whether they're individual out parcels, maybe for a retail facility, so that, and what I mean by that is, like, for example, you've got a plot of land, and you've got a retail strip center with maybe 3 tenants, but then you've also got out parcels maybe that are restaurants or banks or Starbucks or something like that. So the lender may put into place this thing called a release schedule that allows you, as you sell off different bits and pieces of this overall parcel that they have lent you money on, then they will, in essence, agree to a certain dollar amount or a certain percentage of the value of that underlying loan to be paid off and to be, in this particular parcel, to be released for sale. Does that make sense? So, in essence, think of it like this. When you bought this parcel of land, you bought the entire parcel. Maybe this is kind of just the opposite of the option contract thing. This, you bought the entire parcel, but yet you're really, for all intents and purposes, you're subdividing it at least into 5, if not 6 different ownership structures, okay? In other words, you're potentially selling off maybe this part of the shopping center, so A, B, and C are gonna be sold off, and you're gonna sell off D and E, but you may also, and this kind of gets to your point from earlier, you may even have the parking, especially if it's paid parking, to be sold off in a different entity as well, or owned by a different entity, all right? So if that's the case, as you go to sell off A, B, and C, D, and E, one, could make the argument that at least with A, B, C, D, and E, those are the rentable pieces, and if we're saying they're all the same size, then you could say the release provision would be, for each of those, potentially could be 20% of the overall value. Well, but is it really 20% of the overall value? One could make the argument, well, you're leaving out the land value affiliated with the parking, and are all 5 of those parcels, A, B, C, D, and E, equal? Is there one that maybe is worth more than the other? For whatever reasons. It's more visible, it's more accessible, whatever, okay? And so the lender, usually before you ever get to the point of actually selling off the individual parcels, will establish with you, the developer, up front, what is going to be the actual release schedule in terms of saying that if you sell off parcel A, you've got to get X number of dollars or whatever for that parcel, and then that will then allow us to release that parcel. Like, for example, if the overall value of all pieces is maybe, I don't know, $1 million. That's the loan that you've got on the land, let's say, and the developer or and so the release schedule might be something like this. It could be you've got to get $250,000 for this one.
So the lender's setting a minimum price per
In
parcel?
essence, to a certain extent, yes. And so what you're actually seeing here is if you were to add up each of those 250,000s, the total would be 1.2 million or 1.25 million.
Right.
And so the lender is basically saying, once you've sold off the first 4, I know I'm going to be paid back. Okay? And then that 5th one, and then if you also include the value of the parking, and that's extra sort of gravy on the thing. But what the lender doesn't want to get stuck with is, like, what if the lender didn't have any sort of release provisions, and you were to just simply sold each of these parcels for $100,000? And you'd even sold the land for the parking. Well, in that case, that would have only totaled up to $600,000, and the loan on the land was $1 million. Lender wouldn't be very happy with that.
But how could I?
But my point being is, if the lender did not have
A release schedule.
a release schedule, that's how that could happen.
Correct.
Is that you're basically selling off bits and pieces that once you maybe sold off everything, doesn't really come up to the full value of what the actual total project is. Okay.
We had a project in Virginia, had 4 different parcels, 3 building, apartment lots.
There's no recourse.
So as you sell it, as you sell the property, the payoff schedule ensures that as the owner, we get our share of profit,
Right.
not everything goes to pay into the loan. And then once you pay it off, then they redo a new release schedule based on where the loan is at that particular time with the remaining parcels, and they update your numbers and so
Yep.
forth.
I mean, it can get really complex, you know, in terms of how to set this up, but as a general rule, the whole thing is, this is set up so the lender can release any sort of a lien, L-I-E-N-S, any liens, any sort of a lien or liens on those individual subparcels of land, okay? Does that make sense? All right, moving forward. All right. So we're gonna, once again, sort of force you into doing some basic calculations on project feasibility. So let's say that we've got a project and you have determined that the minimum rent that the project needs to generate is how much per square foot per year?
30.
Okay, $30 a square foot. Is minimum rent, okay, required, all right? And assume that, how big is the project? How many square feet? 15,000?
Is that per year?
Yes, per square foot per year. 15,000 square feet is the building, all right? And in this case, do my math here before I set this thing up. So let's say that the current rent is $35,000 a month. Okay, so given those three variables, is this project feasible or not feasible?
Yeah, current rent is less than most.
Okay, we're saying that it needs to generate $30 a square foot in minimum rent. It's 15,000 square feet in size, and the current rental rate is $35,000 a month. Is the current rental rate. So we're asking whether it's feasible or it's not feasible. Okay, so what are we going to do to determine that? We're going to take the 35,000, multiply it by 12.
Divided by 15,000.
That gives us $420,000 a year of actual income, divided by 15,000. That gives us $28 per square foot per year is what it is actually earning, and we need it to earn $30 a square foot, so it is not feasible for our investment purposes. Okay, does that make sense, everybody? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. All right. All right. Project internal rate of return. All right. How much do we buy a building for?
100,000.
Okay. Bought it for 100,000. All right. How long do we hold it for? How many years? 20 years. Okay. And what are we going to sell it for at the end of 20 years?
1.2.
All right. And what sort of a rent is it going to receive on a triple net basis? Well, 18 what? You wanna do it monthly? Or you wanna do it annually? So what sort of rental amount might we do on an annual basis?
$15,000?
Okay, 15,000. Okay. Figure out what the basically the rate of return is on this. You get no solution, you didn't put something in as a negative. Keep in mind, if you're paying for the building up front, that's going to be a negative. Everything else is going to be a positive. It's all income.
I did the other way, but it's still the same math.
Okay? Make sense? Okay. Okay.
Go back, Kevin?
Sorry?
Did you go back? I didn't finish right now. Oh.
That was good. That's when Candy Crush.
No, well, that's mine. Oh, shoot.
Netflix and chill.
Actually, I've never played any of those, honestly. Does that matter? Okay. All right, project NPV. All right, so now let's say that we're going to buy a building, and how much per month is it going to generate in net operating income? Give me a dollar amount. 30,000. Okay, $30,000 a month in net operating income. All right, and we're going to assume it's a triple net lease. And how many years are we going to hold it?
5.
Why does everything always have to be 5?
It's
Let's make it something else. I don't care. 8 years. All right. All right. And what sort of a cap rate are we gonna sell it at?
6%.
6% cap rate. At end of year, basically 8. All right, and what sort of a discount rate are we gonna use on the cash flows? Okay, 7% discount on cash flows. Okay, so what I want you to do is to calculate the NPV. Payments per year. All right, so this is going to be kind of a two-parter. We can do it a couple of different ways. First thing we're going to need to do is figure out what it's going to sell at the end of 8 years, okay? So you're going to take the 30,000 times 12, okay? 30,000 times 12, 360,000. So that'll be NOI, all right? And then that's going to be divided by a 6% cap rate. So it's going to be $6 million is going to be the sale price. Okay, everybody cool with that? That make sense, everybody? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, now what we've got to do is we can put in, just very simply, put in 30,000 as our payment, since it's going to be a consistent amount. 8 shift in, be 96 months, yep. Then we're going to put in, we're going to put in the discount rate of 7%. And we're going to put 6 million. That's future value. So now the question that we're asking is, how much is all of that worth to us today, or what would we be willing to pay for all of that? So we're going to be solving for basically present value. Okay? That's going to be the simplest way to work it. More complex way would be to set up as cash flows, and but this is much simpler. Okay, what do we get? 5,633,262.16 rounded. Okay? That'll be our net present value. Now, what if we were to reduce the rental income, meaning we reduce the NOI by a certain percent, like we reduce it by 10% a year, okay? what impact is that gonna have on our present value? It's gonna go down, but what dollar amount is it gonna go down, okay? So we're gonna reduce, this is gonna be the sort of the next problem, this is gonna be sensitivity analysis to see what actually happens if we change this. So in essence, 10% reduction in NOI is gonna be what, per month?
The
$3,000 a month. So that means that 27,000 is going to be our new NOI. If we have a 10% decline in NOI, that means our new NOI is going to be 27,000.
So your future value would change to that.
Yes. So we'd have 27,000 that would go in there, and then our future value would now be $5,400,000. Okay, meaning our present value is going to be oops, 935, 94. So we lost not quite $600,000 worth of value as a result of basically that 10% decline. And now we could also sort of say, well, what percentage or decrease would that be? So we took the 5069 and divided it into the 5633, 262, 16. Yeah. So basically it works out to be about, this ends up being 10% less than the present value. So it's, in order, I guess my point being is, with a 10% decline in income, we end up with basically a 10% decline in the overall value as well, okay? All right, make sense? Well, it's like
9.00.
Yeah, it's pretty darn close.
So what
Okay.
you divided the.
Yeah, just dividing this into this, but I mean, the point being, the dollar difference between the two, if we actually, that's what, you know, if I'm asking you that, 5633, 262, 16 minus 5069, 935.94, so a difference of 563,326. Okay? Roughly 10%. Okay? Okay? Any questions?
When it says that, you're going to get the quiz.
Yep. Well, it's the last topic, so logically the quiz comes there after. Okay.
Find the numerator.
Shortest number divided by the largest number multiplied by
Okay. So, here's the quiz coming out. I'll give you your answer sheets back here in a minute.
The first question for
how much land do you need? Do you want that displayed in acres or square feet?
You just figure it out.
Oh, wow, the very last one, okay, that's dumb question.